All right, let's get right into it. We're going to break down how a single military flashpoint in a tiny corner of the world managed to send massive shockwaves through the entire global economy. It's a wild story about just how connected everything is and how fast it can all unravel.
So check this out. It all kicked off on February 28th, 2026. US and Israeli forces launched this huge airstrike on Iran. Now, the retaliation? It was incredibly fast. Just 2 days later, Iran shuts down the Strait of Hormuz. And then, bam, by March 4th, you've got global markets in a total freefall. We're talking less than a week for a regional conflict to blow up into a full-blown global crisis. And it all hinged on this one single choke point. To really get your head around the scale of this thing, you have to understand what the Strait of Hormuz actually is. I mean, it's not just some waterway on a map. For the global economy, it is a critical artery, and it just got severed. Think about this for a second. Nearly a third, 30% of all the oil traded by sea anywhere in the world passes through this narrow strait every single day. And just like that, overnight, the tap was turned completely off. And the impact was immediate. I mean, look at these numbers. On February 26th, you had 146 ships pass through. Just a week later, that number craters to only 5. But the most important number on this chart, the one that tells the whole story, is 0. Not a single oil tanker was getting through. The artery was clamped shut. And this paralysis wasn't just about physical mines in the water. The financial risk just went through the roof. The cost to insure a single tanker for a single voyage went from around 600 grand to over $7.5 million. It became so insanely expensive that for most companies, it was just impossible to even get insurance. So what happens next? Well, in all that chaos, you had the biggest names in the business. We're talking giants like Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd. They just suspended all their services through the region. Period. Hundreds of ships were just left stranded, creating this massive logjam out in the Persian Gulf. But then, in the middle of all this, you get this really telling moment, a glimpse of how global power might be shifting. One ship, the Iron Maiden, does something pretty remarkable. It just broadcasts 2 words over its radio: China owner, and it was allowed to pass right through, no problem. That was a huge signal to the rest of the world about a new geopolitical reality taking shape. Okay, so the physical artery is blocked, but that shockwave didn't just stop there. It started traveling through the entire global economic nervous system. And here's the thing, while everybody was watching the price of oil, the real story, the hidden vulnerability, was actually in the chemical supply chain. Yeah, oil prices surged, obviously, but the real eye of this storm was a chemical you probably don't think about much: methanol. It's this basic building block for, well, almost everything. The plastics in your car, the paint on your walls, the fertilizer that grows your food. It's absolutely crucial. And this is where the vulnerability becomes crystal clear. Look at China's dependence on this one region. An unbelievable 70% of its methanol imports came directly from the area that was just blockaded. 60% from Iran alone. You couldn't design a more perfect storm for a market panic. So with the supply basically cut in half overnight, the financial markets just reacted violently. Traders started calling it a historic short squeeze. And a short squeeze is really just a frantic buying panic. People who would bet on prices falling were suddenly forced to buy at any price they could get, which sent the cost of methanol absolutely vertical. But here's the twist. This supply shock didn't sink everybody's boat. In fact, as we're about to see, for a very select group of companies, it actually created a tidal wave of profit like they'd never seen before. So here's the crucial difference. Most of the world makes methanol from natural gas, right? And the price of natural gas was soaring right along with oil. But China? China does it differently. They mainly use their own huge reserves of domestic coal to make methanol. So while the rest of the world's supply chain was broken and costs were skyrocketing, China's was not only intact, it was suddenly wildly profitable. This created this enormous cost advantage, and you could see the dominoes start to fall all the way down the supply chain. Fertilizer prices spiked right at the peak of spring planting season, which put food security at risk. Plastics makers couldn't pass on their soaring costs, so they started facing huge losses. And meanwhile, Chinese producers using their cheaper coal-based chemicals, they were gaining a massive competitive edge. But this crisis wasn't just about economic vulnerabilities. It was also a live-fire demonstration of a complete revolution in modern warfare. This was a new era, where the weapons that create these economic shocks are no longer just bombs and boots on the ground. It's about bytes and drones. In that first strike that kicked this whole thing off, the weapon that gave the US and its allies such a massive advantage, it wasn't a new fighter jet or some powerful bomb. It was something way more subtle. It was an AI platform from the tech company Palantir. This thing acted like a central nervous system for the military. It was automatically listening to and analyzing massive amounts of electronic communications in seconds, a job that would have taken hundreds of human analysts weeks to do. And the stunning success of this tech in a real-world conflict sent Palantir's valuations soaring. It perfectly and kind of chillingly illustrated the company's own internal motto. For them, this crisis was a massive business opportunity. At the exact same time, the conflict was proving just how critical drones and other unmanned systems have become. The sinking of an Iranian drone aircraft carrier was a huge deal. But the high-stakes use and the very high rate of loss of drones on both sides kicked off a brand new global arms race to build, restock, and upgrade these drone fleets. So the immediate crisis might have peaked, but the ripples from this thing are still spreading, and they're reshaping the global economy for the long term. A whole new strategic map is being drawn right now. Over in the Middle East, we're seeing this fundamental reshuffle. As Western companies start pulling back, seeing the region as just too risky, Chinese firms, the ones who proved they were reliable during the crisis, are stepping in. They're gaining huge amounts of strategic trust and market share. And at the same time, the Gulf states themselves are hitting the accelerator on plans to become more self-sufficient, building out their own local industries so they don't get caught in this kind of trap again. And if we look ahead, analysts expect this new reality to stay baked into market prices. Oil is forecast to remain high, somewhere between $84 and $95 a barrel, just because of this persistent risk. Methanol prices, they're going to stay elevated too. And the Shanghai Stock Index is expected to stay strong, really propped up by these powerful resource companies. Ultimately, this whole event is just a powerful lesson in how fragile our global system is. It shows how one single point of failure, one narrow strait, can trigger a massive global chain reaction, creating huge winners and losers and literally redrawing the lines of economic power. It really just leaves us with one critical question to think about. In a world this connected, which strategic choke point is next?